Driving under the influence of drugs, which includes marijuana and many other impairing substances, continues to be a problem on our roadways. Every day, no matter the day of the week or time of day, drivers impaired by drugs are operating vehicles and are a hazard on our streets and highways. Sadly, many go undetected and are not detained even when contacted by law enforcement.
There have been numerous cases throughout the country where law enforcement agencies have been sued for failure to take action against impaired drivers. This includes drivers impaired by alcohol, and more recently, drivers impaired by drugs. Identifying drug impairment is not always easy, and police officers today, more than ever, need to be properly trained and equipped to detect and remove drug-impaired drivers from our roadways.
Training is taking place throughout the country, including in your state, making it possible for police officers to be more proficient in identifying drivers who are impaired by drugs other than alcohol.
Hey, Officer Schway, Mason Police Department. Do you know why I stopped you?
No, sir.
All right, so I was following you for a little bit and noticed you were speeding and also had difficulty maintaining your lane. Where are you coming from today?
My friend's house.
All right, have you had any alcohol today?
I don't drink.
I smelled a little bit of marijuana in the car. When was the last time you smoked marijuana?
I smoked earlier this morning, but I'm not drunk.
Here on your bumper, okay? Just sit tight. I'm gonna grab some paperwork. I'll be right back, all right? When I tell you to begin, I want you to take 9 heel-to-toe steps down that straight line. You're gonna turn around and take 9 heel-to-toe steps back. The entire time while you're taking your steps, make sure you look at your feet, you count your steps out loud, and you continue taking the 9 steps in each way until the test is over. Do you understand this?
It is important that police officers understand and be able to recognize the indicators of drug impairment, not only for marijuana, but any impairing substance.
All the way till I tell you to stop. Did you finish the test? Okay, go ahead, relax for me.
The goal of the Drug Evaluation and Classification Program, also known as the Drug Recognition Expert Program, is to provide police officers with the tools to identify and remove drug-impaired drivers from the roadways to save lives and reduce crashes.
Here's a nightmare scenario. You stop a vehicle for speeding. You contact the driver and do not detect an odor of an alcoholic beverage on his breath. The driver does not have a valid operator's license, and you issue a citation to the driver. You direct the driver to park his vehicle and call someone to come and get him. You leave the area, and a short time later, you hear a radio broadcast of a speeding, reckless driver, and the vehicle description matches the vehicle you had just stopped. Minutes later, you then hear an additional broadcast of a crash involving the reckless driver. It is later determined that the driver of the vehicle you stopped collided with another vehicle, killing the driver. This scenario is actually a real-life incident that did occur, and the offending driver later tested positive for impairing drugs in his blood system. Up until recently, drugged driving was relatively easy to get away with. Frustrated law enforcement officers oftentimes lack the tools and training to properly identify and prove a driver was impaired by drugs. The Drug Recognition Expert Program was created to address this growing problem. DRE is now a highly effective and proven drug influence identification resource for all law enforcement agencies. Each year, thousands of drug influence evaluations are conducted by DREs in the United States, Canada, and other countries. With the continuing efforts to legalize marijuana, as well as some other impairment-causing drugs, being able to recognize drug-impaired drivers is even more crucial for keeping our roadways safe and preventing crashes and deaths. As law enforcement officers, contacting a driver impaired, whether by alcohol and/or drugs, and let go, creates a major civil liability risk to you personally and to your agency.
Here we have some DRE students who are evaluating an individual who has recently ingested drugs. They are doing a preliminary examination, asking the person some general questions, and getting some preliminary information. They will then be conducting a battery of psychophysical tests, which are all part of the DRE 12-step drug impairment evaluation process.
All right, so what drugs did you use today?
I just smoked a little bit of pot right before I left my friend's house. That's all I do.
Essentially, the DRE is a sophisticated crime scene investigator, specializing in recognizing and articulating the impairing effects of drugs from various drug categories. The DRE responds to identify and collect vital evidence, which is often short-lived, The DREs interpret and document the entire evidence of the drug influence evaluation to identify the drug category or categories most likely responsible for the driver's impairment. The Advanced Roadside Impaired Driving Enforcement, or ARIDE trained officer's role is much like a first responding officer who does an initial assessment and then secures the crime scene. The DRE responds to identify and collect vital evidence, store it through a written record, and interpret it to identify the likely cause of the impairment. Courts have closely examined the DEC program and have found its methodology to be well-founded upon a reasonable degree of scientific certainty. Going to a drugged driving trial without the testimony of a DRE can be like prosecuting an alcohol DUI case without standardized field sobriety tests. It could be done, but it is much more difficult. To help meet their burden of proof, prosecutors must have thorough documentation of evidence, including the drug impairment indicators, before they will bring the case to court. The evidence gathered by an officer trained in Advanced Roadside Impaired Driving Enforcement, the systematic standardized DRE process, along with the toxicity results, will provide solid facts and evidence needed to proceed in court. Whenever possible, DREs will use a 12-step systematic and standardized procedure on every impaired driving suspect evaluated. The evaluation typically takes approximately 45 to 60 minutes to complete. Completing the 12-step DRE evaluation is crucial because in some states, the courts require probable cause to justify the request for an individual to provide a urine or blood sample to corroborate the DRE's opinion. However, just because a suspect refuses to provide a urine or blood sample does not prohibit the DRE from conducting an evaluation.
Typically, when we think of drug-impaired driving, we think of someone impaired by methamphetamine or heroin or other similar drugs. But as we know, there are numerous impairing substances being used and abused by drivers today, which includes prescription or over-the-counter medications. Even though it may indicate do not operate heavy machinery or equipment on the package or container, many people ignore these warnings and drive impaired, which is another important reason for using a DRE when drug impairment is suspected.
All right, so you only used marijuana today, no other drugs today?
I don't do anything else. Drugs are bad.
Some officers may not think they have enough probable cause or proof, or think they are not qualified or experienced enough to arrest a driver for drugged driving. Both the ARIDE and DRE program provide officers with the tools to believe in themselves and say, okay, I see something that's out of the ordinary. I've observed driving I would equate with a DUI driver. What is it about this driver that makes me think he might be under the influence of something other than alcohol? Drug use has a wide range of effects on users. Some common signs to look for include drunk-like behavior with a low or no alcohol content, dilated or constricted pupils, hyper or overly relaxed demeanor, mood swings, agitation, poor balance and coordination, bloodshot eyes, facial and/or body tremors. Observations like these and others should start keying you into thinking, maybe I should get a DRE involved in this case. Officers need to first develop probable cause during the traffic stop and determine that the driver is possibly impaired. This should include administering the standardized field sobriety tests. Once you have developed probable cause, then make the arrest treating it the same way you'd conduct a DUI alcohol arrest, which includes administering a breath test to the suspect. If the suspect's level of impairment is not consistent with the breath alcohol test result, it is recommended to request a DRE to assist with the investigation. When contacted by the DRE, he or she is probably going to ask a few questions about the circumstances of the stop and arrest. They will want to know what kind of driving you observed, how the suspect performed on the SFSTs, what statements the suspect made, and what the breath test result was. The DRE evaluates and assesses the person's appearance and behavior. The DRE also carefully measures and records vital signs and makes precise observations of the person's autonomic responses and reactions. The DRE also administers carefully designed psychophysical tests to evaluate the person's judgment, information processing ability, coordination, and various other characteristics. These psychophysical tests can provide strong evidence to show the suspect could not operate a motor vehicle safely. The DRE will systematically consider everything about the person that could indicate the influence of drugs.
One area where an officer might misunderstand the use of a DRE is that the DRE does not take over the arrest from the arresting officer. It is the officer's DUI arrest. The DRE is requested to conduct a drug influence evaluation and identify the cause of impairment to assist in the investigation. If you need a DRE, you'll typically go through your own agency. If one is not available, other agencies may have DREs available to assist you.
Sharing DREs is a solid practice among law enforcement agencies. Oftentimes, the DRE is called in on another officer's arrest. The DRE is there to collect evidence on behalf of the arresting officer, not to take over the arrest. Sharing DREs as a resource among agencies is a good practice when agencies may be faced with limited resources.
The DRE drug influence evaluation is generally a post-arrest procedure. The DRE will typically meet you at the local intake center or precinct office where the DRE evaluation will be conducted. After a brief interview with the DRE, the arresting officer, depending on your department policy, can assist with the evaluation or return to patrol if needed. In some situations, the DRE may request that you stay and be witness to the evaluation process. The DRE will then perform the 12-step drug influence evaluation. A blood or urine sample will be requested, and the suspect will be booked or released per department policy. It is the DRE's job to provide supporting facts and observations for prosecution.
The DRE program is making a difference because we're taking drivers off the road who maybe 10 or 15 years ago would not have been recognized as being impaired by drugs. Officers are starting to learn how to identify those drivers, and with the added resource of DREs, we're able to gain more convictions.
Law enforcement officers need to become more proficient in recognizing drug-impaired drivers so that we can take appropriate action and not release impaired drivers at roadside. Our goal is to make our roadways safer and save lives.